Okay, so now the IRGC, they need to get their own slide, right? Because actually, I was at an event maybe 8 months ago, something like that. Maybe a couple months after I finished this presentation, after my original research, I met with a gentleman, and he was from Iran. He was a part of the diaspora. His mother fled the country after the 79 revolution, and for his senior thesis in college, he took on the challenge of who would succeed Ali Khamenei as supreme leader. Ali Khamenei, when he died, he was 86 years old. We know his prostate was removed in 2014. There are reports that his prostate cancer was returning to him, that threatened his life. So maybe he wasn't going to live much longer regardless. But his thesis focused on that, well, what does Khamenei, if you've been paying attention tonight, Khamenei was mentored by Ruhollah Khomeini. And Khomeini, first supreme leader, top of the 79 revolution. So that means Khamenei had ties to the 79 revolution. He was exiled. He was a key figure in helping remove the Shah. So he had the ties to the 79 revolution. However, this individual I discussed this with realized that Khamenei's been around so long and the 79 revolution was 47, 50 years ago, that most of those people are now dead. They're too old to really reign as the supreme leader, to have the justification for really having the ideals of the 79 revolution. So his thesis, he argued, and I kind of came up with the same conclusion, is that the IRGC would essentially, they'd have a puppet supreme leader, a puppet Ayatollah, but the Revolutionary Guard would be more or less having total reign on the country. It would be a military state, essentially, and we may be seeing this if you're seeing reports of Khamenei's son, I believe his name starts with an M, I can't pronounce it, Mojab, something like that, would be maybe the third supreme leader of Iran. And that would make sense because his father helped the IRGC grow at a significant rate, and he'd essentially be the puppet Ayatollah, the puppet supreme leader with some name legitimacy, even though it cuts against the ideals of ending 2,500 years of kingship in Persia by having the bloodline Khamenei's son succeed Khamenei, that being a problem in itself, because the IRGC would have total control of the country at that point. So it really, they could sidestep that problem of not having a justified leader from the 79 revolution anymore, because the IRGC would actually be the leader. So I think that's what's going to happen, especially if Khamenei's son is the next supreme leader, if the regime can survive this campaign waged by Israel and the United States. However, what does the Revolutionary Guard actually do? They're separate from the military. They conduct internet blackouts. They will attempt to remove people that are unloyal to the regime or help sniff out traitors if they can, and will elevate the supreme leader. They're always looking for ways to, especially under Ali Khamenei, to expand his reach. They were incredibly loyal to him. They reported to the supreme leader and worked for the supreme leader, as well as advanced the supreme leader's agenda. So now with Khamenei no longer there, the fate of the group now is they kind of have their own sandbox now for the first time. They served the time needed to under Khamenei, and now they might get it. We know who was the chief of staff or the leader of the Revolutionary Guard, Qasem Soleimani. We'll talk about him in a little bit. So something that if you see online, if you've been following, they're like, oh, we killed the Ayatollah, and then somebody will quote tweet that tweet and say, we replaced an Ayatollah, or the Ayatollah with another Ayatollah, or the Ayatollah, or something like that, right? It's because it's similar to a cardinal, the rank of a cardinal in the Catholic Church, or some other hierarchy within their religion. That's what an Ayatollah is. They're in Tehran. I'm not sure if you've been paying attention, after the nuclear strikes against Fordo and Isfahan and Natanz, there was a 98-year-old Ayatollah that issued a fatwa calling for the death of Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump. And they were like, oh, why didn't Khamenei say this? Well, it's a lot of elderly men that kind of like at the Catholic Church in Rome. It's just a bunch of old dudes praying. And now where's this come from? Again, this is probably now the 7th or 8th time I've mentioned a national identity, as it comes from their religion. The Ayatollah, it's a Shiite cleric, source of emulation. And the Council of Guardians, the body I mentioned before, includes 6 of these Ayatollahs within the body. But there is always some divide, right? There's other clerical networks, there's other Ayatollahs that oppose the religious teachings of other Ayatollahs, right? So they're not all on the same page. It's not a monolith. Let's focus on the office of the Supreme Leader in particular now. You have it formerly Ali Khamenei, the second Supreme Leader. The office is now vacant. He was loyal to, I've said this a gazillion times now at this point, the head of state. He was the sovereign, rules with significant force and power, controls the state media, controls the candidates that run for president, wears multiple hats, not multiple turbans. He's the Supreme Leader and the dictator at once, and he was 86 years old at the time of his killing. So, again, makes all foreign policy decisions. State media can veto any laws from the Congress or the judiciary or the other legislative bodies, the parliament, the military, whether that's the standard Iranian military or the Revolutionary Guard, reported to Khamenei exclusively. So for one person out of a nation of 92 million has had a lot of sole capabilities there. Geopolitical leverage points, as back to the analogy about all countries at the table for a game of poker. The Strait of Hormuz, that's 20% of the global oil supply. That's a big deal right there. They can close it at any time and cause stress and discomfort to global markets. The proxy network, I believe there's a whole slide on them alone, but the proxies spread the Iranian revolutionary ideals and the regime's objectives to other countries in the Middle East and within the region. As you've seen it in the war going on, if you've been following, their 2 strongest cards by far is the missile defense program, the hypersonic missiles. They have been able to produce very, very cheap, and drone programs as well. Their drones seem to be maybe not at a high level, but at a noteworthy level, targeting strikes overwhelming the Iron Dome within Tel Aviv and other key financial centers within Israel, and U.S. bases and the Gulf countries as well, and targeting other financial centers of Gulf countries, right, and other Arab nations. And the nuclear program is a bargaining chip. As I've said before, having the bomb, it's not really necessary. It's having the hedge and the edge to acquire the bomb is what really is their kind of threat, right? They always want to have the appearance of maybe being close to the bomb. And so that's some of their leverage points. Yeah, the regime is able to utilize to remain in power. Maybe it's to prevent a domestic uprising or attacks such as what's happening right now. A little more on the nuclear program itself is now their public view and public statements have always been is that it's a civilian nuclear program used for agriculture or medical equipment and not meant to enrich for weapons grade uranium. However, there is global skepticism, whether it's other Arab nations or European countries, the United States, Israel, really anywhere else is kind of, are you for sure, dog? Really? We don't really believe you. And now here's something that I've talked about this a little bit. You have mentioned this before, all of this right now, what's happening is totally unnecessary, because in 2015, 2016, Obama had this solved for the time being. The Iran nuclear deal, the Iranians were compliant with it. After several IAEA inspections, there was no wrongdoing by the Iranians, and it was for global sanction relief that some of the sanctions were uplifted that Iran, they were not allowed to enrich uranium at above a certain percentage. And everything that was reported is that they were compliant with it. Everybody was holding up their end of the deal with the Iran nuclear deal. However, in 2018, Donald Trump exited from the deal, which caused anger, confusion, I should say, as well, because it was effective. They were not enriching uranium. And now we saw in September of 2025, the IAEA monitoring is cut off. They were shut off. The valve was cut off. The tap was eliminated, and they just totally went silent when it came to the nuclear program. And the program, it gives the country leverage, as I said, in terms of policy, diplomacy, whatever. It gives them a bargaining chip that a lot of other countries don't have. Now comes in the proxy network. One of the I'd argue probably right now the second biggest, if not the biggest, factor of regime survival. You have proxies that allow the regime to spread its influence across the Middle East, particularly the crown jewel proxy with Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. You should check out the Lebanon episode I created a few months ago about how Iran was giving Hezbollah around $1 billion to help rebuild, because I think they knew what was coming. And just a couple months from then, you also have the Houthis that target on the Red Sea. They target cargo shipping and the waterways, the other boats on the Red Sea that carry expensive and important goods and other huge resources, right? Hamas within Palestine, they keep a check right on the borders of Israel, along with Hezbollah to the north. The PMO, the PMF, the Popular Mobilization Force in Iraq, that helps. And as well, before Assad's regime fell in December of 2024, the Revolutionary Guard had a major presence in Syria for that Syrian civil war, and they're still Shiite militias within Syria. So what I'm trying to say is that you have the identity that has now expanded into several countries across the Middle East and the region, and it forces kind of all of the other countries to at least kind of keep the ear wide open, eyes open for attacks or other conflict mechanisms that these proxy groups may be able to inflict on them. We know that Tehran funds these proxy groups, for whether it's cash or ammunition, guns, weapons, intelligence, Revolutionary Guard training and support. And now they are deemed the world's largest state sponsor of terror due to having these groups, though. So that's the downside of it for the Iranian perspective. Let's take a look at where the global relationships, where they currently sit worldwide. As you've seen, nobody's really helping them except their proxies. They're kind of on their own. China is really nowhere to be found, and same with Russia. Even their biggest allies are nowhere to be seen. So it's Iran versus it's kind of Iran versus the United States, and two major powers right now, and that's causing some stress in Tehran. However, you have the United States. You have sanctions, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action under President Obama. 2020, you have this assassination of Qasem Soleimani, the founder and the architect of the Axis of Resistance, otherwise known as the Proxy Network. Russia, they get some help from Syria coordination when Assad, because Russia lost a lot of influence when Assad went down as well. So Russia, you have arms sales, energy deals, intelligence coordination. Same with China. So we know China's Belt and Road investments and initiative runs through the Islamic Republic to kind of help get to Europe. We know Europe, right, kind of same as the United States. The nuclear program is a concern for the European nations. The snapback sanctions were applied in September of 2025. In North Korea, they're really aligned just because both are anti-West in general, so nothing major there. So that's just a little bit of the global stage that the country finds themselves at the moment. Other Middle Eastern and neighbor relations, right? The Sunni capital of Muslims, right? In Saudi Arabia, there's always a kind of rivalry, maybe the Kentucky Wildcats versus the Louisville Cardinals kind of beef, right? Close in proximity. They're both, in this case, both Muslim, both from Kentucky, but there's always that rivalry that will always kind of be there. And again, college sports is not, we're not trying to kill each other. We're not trying to inflict major harm. Like, that's just a good little analogy maybe to help you at home understand this. Excuse me. But really, they're kind of, as you've seen with all of these attacks against the Gulf countries, Iran, they're kind of on their own again, once again. Like, they're totally globally isolated for all of this. So just a little something for you to understand there as well. Especially, so a question that I get all the time is that, well, the Iraq invasion in 2003, right, you have Saddam Hussein go down. Why did Iran not help Iraq? Well, even though Iraq is a little more Shiite population, is that Hussein was a Sunni Muslim himself. So a rising tide lifts all boats. So with Iraq gone, Iran was able to, get the popular mobilization force integrated a lot more within the country, and as well, it destabilized the nation. Some economic sanctions and social change there has been even before these protests in late 2025, early 2026. The oil is still the big, and natural gasoline is still the biggest, most important factor for their economy, for sure, right? Especially with the snapback sanctions. They cannot get integrated in the regional economy, and even things with China and Russia are limited. Even trade, I should say, with Russia and China. They're going through the same thing that we are. Their currency, high inflation. I should say we have high inflation, but their currency also collapsed a couple days after New Year's Day, or few days before New Year's Day. It just totally fell. Like, their central bank went under. So that's another stressor for the regime that they have to figure out. Yeah, it's the youth population. They went to school. Even some of the women have been allowed. The regime has lifted some restrictions on education for women within the country, but there's still some difficulties, right? And some big protest waves in the last 10 to 15 years in particular against Khamenei's regime. Wanting to go into these protests for another moment, the Green Movement in 2009, anytime you see these big protests happen, on one of the Man on the Street interviews with the younger lady I should say I was talking to, is that she was able to reach out to some of her relatives and family members within the country before the internet was totally just shut down after the attacks last Saturday morning / Friday night. And this Masha Amini woman in particular, this protest in 2022 began because she defied the hijab laws and was beat to death by Revolutionary Guard security forces, and it sparked a mass protest in that sector. And I believe even a couple of months ago, I saw something that Pezeshkian's the incumbent president of Iran, we'll check this after, but the incumbent president of Iran, Pezeshkian's, one of his daughters, broke the hijab rule or something, and the regime lifted the hijab clause for a period of time, or maybe it's still lifted, I'm not sure. But I did see something about that. There is a lot of surveillance, right? Big brother type of feel. And we see the protest happening late December, early January of 2025, or 2026, late 2025 and early 2026 occur across the country. One of the individuals I spoke with on Saturday was an Iranian diaspora. He said he had lived in Isfahan and had been in the United States for 45 years or something like that. Now, 5 to 7 million Iranians fled the country around the 79 revolution after that occurred. And there's still some, one of the figures, if you saw, again, on one of the Man on the Street interviews, a A woman was holding a picture of her cousin that had been killed by security personnel during the protest back in January, had a photo of the Shah, wanted Reza Pahlavi to regain the title of, or the crown for the monarchy, right? So let's